Welcome, everyone. My name is Esther Lee, President of the Chinese American Heritage Foundation. It is a great pleasure to learn about Stanford program on international and cross-cultural education named SPICE, a bridge between Stanford University and schools. Our moderator is Ann Kono. She is the co-founder of TeachAAPI, and 501c3 focus on partnering with schools to implement and integrate AAPI curriculum through innovative and engaging programming. Founded in May of 2021, the organization has formalized support from key schools in Southern California. To date, their programs have reached over 3,000 students and growing. Professionally, Anne spent over 2 decades in the finance investment management industry. So now spend time on nonprofit work, director roles, and entrepreneurial pursuits. Anne is thrilled to see AAPI come together to enable change. Now let's welcome Anne, and he will introduce our 3 guests today.
Thank you, Esther. Before we begin, we want to thank you and Wilson Lee for putting together this exciting program of daily events with notable AAPI in the month of May. It's been really exciting to see all of the types of people that you've brought together. And I'm really excited to have this panel of esteemed academics, but also historians of Asian American history with me today. So our program today will consist of an introduction to SPICE's work by Gary Mukai, and then followed by Dr. Tanya Lee, who will focus on the Chinese Scholars Program, and then followed by Melanie Chan of CACA. So let me introduce them to you today. Dr. Gary Mukai is the Director of Stanford Program on International and Cross-Cultural Education, Freeman Spogli Institute for International Studies at Stanford University. SPICE focuses its work on in 4 areas: curriculum development for elementary and secondary schools, teacher professional development, distance learning education, and educational research. SPICE's roots date back to a program on China in 1973. Before joining SPICE in 1988, he was a school teacher in Japan and California. He is a graduate of UC Berkeley and Stanford University. Some of the things that we don't hear about Gary, because he's so humble, is that his programming has impacted thousands and thousands, and according to Stanford's website, maybe millions of students and educators. So he's made a tremendous impact as it relates to propagating Asian American and cross-cultural education across the world. Next, I'd like to introduce Dr. Tanya Lee, an ethnomusicologist. She's the instructor of SPICE's China Scholars Program, a synchronous online-only course for high school students featuring real-time guest lectures by Stanford faculty. In the course that was launched in 2017, students explore key issues in contemporary China with an emphasis on its relationship with the United States, as well as the Chinese American experience. Prior to SPICE, she worked at Duke University, the University of Illinois Urbana campaign, and at Yunnan University's foreign language secondary school in Kunming, China. She is the graduate of the University of Washington, Oberlin College, and the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. Lastly, but not least, I'd like to introduce you to Melanie Chan. She is the national president for the Chinese American Citizens Alliance, or CACA. She had previously served in various capacities at the local level with the San Francisco Lodge of Chinese American Citizens Alliance, and still remains very active on the local level. As someone committed to the well-being and interests of the Chinese American and AAPI communities, she is able to contribute her skills and experience to support the Chinese American Citizens Alliance mission of civil equality, citizenship, and brotherly love. And just a small piece of information, all 3 of our panelists today work at Stanford University. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Gary Mukai, who will open this program.
Thank you very much, Anne. It's really been a pleasure getting to know you through this process. So allow me to share my screen. Are we okay?
It's not the full screen.
Yeah, sorry. Oh, here we go. Thank you.
Yep.
So my presentation today will primarily be descriptive with a focus on the importance SPICE places upon collaboration. I'm going to talk about several of our collaborations over the past many years. And I wanted to let you know that we're exploring possibilities of collaboration with both Anne at TeachAAPI and Melanie with the Chinese American Citizens Alliance. As Anne mentioned, SPICE is a program of the Freeman Spogli Institute for International Studies at Stanford University. Allow me to share a brief history of it. As Anne mentioned, the roots of SPICE actually date back to a program on China in 1973. And in that year, there was an initiative taken by Stanford faculty members to help teachers in the Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area, upgrade the teaching about China in the schools. This work focused on two areas: the development of curriculum on China, which, by the way, included a curriculum unit on Chinatown in San Francisco. So it had some focus on the role of Chinese Americans in the US-China relationship. And also the second area was on teacher professional development. By 1976, other projects, including a project on Japan, a project on Africa, and a project on Latin America, were added to the China project. And the acronym SPICE was created, the Stanford Program on International and Cross-Cultural Education. Over the years, the areas of focus have shifted. At one time, there was a project, for example, on the Soviet Union. So SPICE serves as a bridge between FSI, Stanford, and schools. And we continue to develop curricular materials. We continue to offer teacher professional development. And from about 20 years ago, we began to offer online courses directly to high school students in the United States. Since then, we have offered courses overseas to Japan and China, and we're hoping to expand that. And more recently, we have given some focus to educational research, and we will do more of that in the years to come. So I'd like to describe for you some of our collaborations. One collaboration was a curriculum-focused project that we completed in collaboration with primarily three scholars, Gordon Chang, Shelley Fishkin, and Roland Siu, who were working with the Chinese railroad workers in North America project here at Stanford. And what we tried to do is make their scholarship with this project accessible to students in the United States. But since then, the curriculum that we've developed and the primary sources on the website has actually reached thousands of educators and students in China and other parts of the world as well. So I want to reinforce the importance that SPICE places upon primary sources, such as engaging students in the analysis of this photograph of Chinese railroad workers. And in this particular curriculum, we underscore the important role that the Chinese had in building the Transcontinental Railroad, but also indirectly to the establishment of Stanford University. So that's one collaboration. And another collaboration is in the area of teacher professional development with a national organization called the National Consortium for Teaching About Asia. And we engaged one of the scholars with the Chinese Railroad Workers in North America project, Dr. Siu, with one of my colleagues, Greg Francis, and offered this webinar for teachers throughout the United States to introduce not only the archives, the primary sources of the Chinese Railroad Workers in North America project, but also our curriculum as well. So the curriculum helps to bridge the scholarship with classrooms and specifically with students. We also continue to, though they've been on hold a bit, offer in-person teacher professional development seminars, also in collaboration with the National Consortium for Teaching About Asia. And we also collaborate with many other organizations in the United States in offering webinars and in-person seminars. This summer, we'll be working with the East-West Center in Honolulu. Another important collaboration was with PBS, and we developed a teacher guide for this film on the Chinese Exclusion Act that PBS offers to anyone who accesses the film. So again, this was our way to help teachers set the context for the film, to provide some guiding questions, to suggest ways that students can view the film, and also, of course, debriefing activities as well. So this guide is offered for free on the PBS website. And this was our attempt to help promote this film in schools nationally, primarily in this case, the high school level and at the collegiate level as well. Another collaboration was with a local artist, a Chinese American artist, and the Angel Island Immigration Foundation. We utilized some of the archival materials from Angel Island, and Rich Lee developed this graphic novel, which is used really extensively across the United States. And we think it offers a very interactive, engaging way of sharing the story of a paper son, so-called paper son, who went through Angel Island and the rigorous interrogation process before he was able to come ashore. So the links to the Chinese Exclusion Act are included in this guide as well. And you can see here some of the scenes from the graphic novel, which includes poetry that were carved into the walls of the barracks. And as you can see on the bottom here. And we try to develop in students an awareness that not all immigration to the United States was easy. In the case of the Chinese who came after the Exclusion Act, it was extremely difficult. And so we try to capture the spirit of that in this graphic novel. I hope you'll have a chance to take a look at it. One of our more recent collaborations was with the Mineta Legacy Project. We worked with the late Secretary Norman Mineta, who recently passed away, sadly, and developed a website free to any teacher, students, and it focuses on themes like immigration, US-Japan relations, World War II, topics like World War II. Many of the topics were drawn from and reflect the life of Secretary Norman Mineta. I hope you have a chance to take a look at this. And one of the outcomes of this website was direct involvement with students across the US who have accessed the website. And we asked them a question: what does it mean to be an American? And we post their succinct reflections about every quarter. And For teachers and students who are in attendance today, I hope teachers will refer students to me, or students, you're welcome to write to me directly. It's this type of work that we would like to further discuss with Anne and her colleagues at TeachAAPI, because they work directly with students. Now, with that, I'd like to turn the mic over to my colleague, Dr. Lee, who will talk about her work in the China Scholars Program. We offer several online courses to students in the United States, the high school level. One of our most popular courses is the China Scholars Program. Here is Dr. Lee with Dr. Gordon Chang, with whom we've collaborated over the years. So with that, Tanya, may I turn it over to you?
Yes, thank you, Gary. There we go. Hi, hello, everyone. So yes, I am the instructor for SPICE's China Scholars Program, which has been running 5 years now. Anyway, since 2017. This is a semester-long course for 10th, 11th, and 12th graders offered online through Zoom, which used to be a new and exciting way of interacting for the students and no longer is. But we keep up, now it's a very comfortable medium for everyone to interact in. And we cover, the topic of the course is US-China relations. And while we do spend the most amount of time on what you normally think of with that phrase, political relations, geopolitics, economic relations, we also interpret that theme in a much more multidisciplinary lens. So we also look at ways that US and China have influenced each other culturally, or ways that, well, the Chinese American experience, of course, ways that Chinese immigrants have come and influenced the United States. We take a little bit of a look at the way that historically Americans have encountered China. In fact, one of our required texts is Gordon Chang's book, Fateful Ties, 2015 book, A History of America's Preoccupation with China, which I highly recommend if you're interested. It's a history. And it sort of takes a much more in-depth and long-term look at US-China cultural relations than most of us have in our head. He's sort of doing this on the premise that the United States was founded, or the Americas were explored by Europeans in the interest of reaching China. So, starting from that point, it develops into a very interesting story. So we use that. We also, though, spend some time just learning about China itself, because of course, these are American students and have not covered China for the most part in their school curriculum. So we spend some amount of time just learning some of the facts about China, but the focus is contemporary China, meaning 20th and 21st century. And we use Elizabeth Economy's book, The Third Revolution, Xi Jinping and the New Chinese State, to get us up to speed with the current regime. The students are, I have about 20 students each semester, and they're drawn from all across the country, occasionally beyond the borders of the United States. I'm going to talk a little bit about their profile in a moment. The important thing for the moment is that they are Americans who have come through an American educational system. So that covers our what we talk about, and the way that we do this is the course is divided into modules on different themes, such as political relations, economic relations, sometimes cinema, or Chinese American history. And in each module, we invite a guest speaker, usually Stanford faculty, to come and interact directly with the students. For example, we have Tom Finger, former State Department researcher and diplomat, speak to us about US-China political relations. We're very privileged to have Nick Hope, who was formerly the China director for the World Bank, and he's now retired, and he comes and talks about economics and global government. everything is very discussion oriented. The students are interacting with each other extensively on the discussion boards. In addition to all of that progression through the semester, the students do independent research projects, a full length, well, a 10-page academic research project. So I'm going to share with you, if I have time, what it looks like. We use Canvas as our course platform. And can you all see that? Okay, so this is last fall, and there's a list of our some of our modules. I'm going to open up Chinese American Experience, and this is one of our more history-oriented ones. This is the only one where we dip into the 19th century. Recently, we've been inviting William Gao, who teaches at, formerly was at Stanford and is now teaching at CSU Sacramento, who does a wonderful job introducing us to Chinese American history. We've had Gordon Chang in the past, Eileen Shaw at Duke University, various other folks. We read a little bit of an overview of the history. We look at some of the relevant chapters in the book I just showed you. We watch an excerpt from the Chinese Exclusion Act that Gary was just talking about. And then we kind of bring it up to date. So whatever's happening, this was about this was a 2020 article about anti-Asian racism, but I sort of go with the moment as far as what's happening in the world at that time. And then each module is structured so that after we've all done these core readings, the students each choose a subtopic on which I have assigned readings, and then read and digest and synthesize those, come to the discussion board and present to each other the readings that they did, and then discuss them. So that in that way, the whole class can cover a much wider range of topics, but not everyone has to read everything. So for Chinese American history, we look at 19th century racist imagery, sort of political cartoons, Chinatowns in the American imagination. These are some YouTube videos that are helpful. We actually looked at a little clip of Flower Drum Song from 1961, the Rodgers and Hammerstein musical, because it has a really vibrant and perhaps idealistic depiction of Chinatown. Chinese Americans in science is a very popular topic because a lot of our students are personally interested in that. The legacy of the Chinese Exclusion Act, which is that is likely to be the only thing that students have studied in their American history classes about Chinese American history, but they definitely do not get enough on it or enough sense of the actual significance of that law to all of US immigration. Chinese American food, obviously a popular topic. And undocumented immigration, I like to go dip into the 90s because everyone has forgotten about another thing that was very important for where we are now in US immigration, which was the shipwreck of the Golden Venture in 1993. I don't know if you all remember that, but hundreds of undocumented Chinese immigrants ended up on Long Island and imprisoned for years, and there was a whole legal process around them. This is a great film about that. So that's the content as far as our Chinese American material goes. And in that sense, all we do is about a week, but there's more to it than that. As I mentioned, the students also have independent research projects. Many of them do choose to focus on something to do with Chinese Americans. Last fall, a student did a paper on Chinese American scientists, cultural paradoxes, and geopolitical commodities, looking at sort of the conflicted roles of scientists of Chinese descent in the United States. Another student did the ideological repatriation of overseas Chinese communities, impact on US-China geopolitical hostility. It's a mouthful, but politics and Chinese Americans. And a couple of students have actually done papers on their own family history, which is a little tricky because I don't want them to write a memoir. I need them to write an academic paper. And it's a very interesting process to kind of connect your own personal history with a broader historical context. Oh, and yeah, currently I have a student who's not Chinese at all writing about the history of Chinese restaurants in the United States. So let me unshare. So the other really significant and perhaps even more, oh, that's debatable, perhaps more significant connection to Chinese American life is the students themselves. I would say that approximately 1/3 to 1/2 of my students are of Chinese heritage. And probably 3/4 of them, 3/4 of the total student body, each cohort, is Asian American. And virtually all of them, with just an occasional exception, are from immigrant families, whether Asian or not, and or are people of color. Now, this is not intentional on our part in our selection. There is a rigorous selection process, but we end up with that profile of student based on self-selection. These are the kids who are applying. It's hardly surprising that we get a lot of Chinese Americans. And a lot of them, when they write their essays, do say, I'm particularly interested in this because I want to learn more about my heritage. I feel like I haven't had an opportunity to learn about that. A lot of them are, they're 15, 16, 17. So a lot of them have gone through a period in their lives already where they rejected their Chinese identity and wanted to not be Chinese, and then kind of came around and realized, oh my gosh, actually, I really, really want to know more about this. So I get those kids. But, I get a huge range. I get everything from students who were born and educated in China and came to the United States, maybe just for high school. I get, your more standard, I suppose, profile of kids born in the US to immigrant parents. I get students who were born somewhere in the Chinese diaspora, but have come to the United States early in life. I get 3rd, 4th generation Chinese Americans, multiracial families. I get ethnic minority students who are Chinese, come from Chinese families, but their families are ethnic minorities in China. So really, I mean, I've had a Uyghur student. Really, I get I feel like the maximum diversity of Chinese American students and of Asian American students, because of course I have South Asians, Koreans, Japanese, Vietnamese, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All of which makes for a really interesting dynamic for the students in getting to know each other. For some of them, this maybe is not radically different from their homeschool life, if say they're from San Francisco, but I also have students from small town Ohio or Kansas or Florida, where they do not have this around them. And especially for those kids, it's so exciting for them to be able to connect to other Asian American kids, Chinese American kids who, get it. And where they can together kind of get into a discussion of these identity issues. Furthermore, since so many of the students do have varying degrees of connection to China, many of them have spent a great deal of time in China, they are able to teach each other a lot about their own knowledge and experiences in contemporary China, which in that sense exceeds mine because I haven't been there for many years. So I feel that, we go into all of this content and very rigorously, and that's what everyone is focused on in the here and now, as far as why they're taking this course and what they got out of it. But I feel like in the long run, as they grow up and look back, I hope and I predict that it will be those connections to their peers, that this network that they have sort of seeded in getting to know very like-minded kids maybe with similar heritages, maybe not, but who are interested in a lot of the same issues at this age. And then they all go off to college and connect and reconnect in who knows how many ways. I predict that that network is going to have the more lasting impact for them. And that's what I really try to nurture and ensure that there's a lot of opportunity for them to discuss things and to stay connected afterwards. So I think that kind of covers the Chinese American aspect of what I do.
Okay.
So I think we go to
Thank you very
Melanie.
much.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So it's going to be Melanie.
Yes, all right, thank you. All right, I'm going to share my screen also. Let's see here. Okay. All right, so I'm going to talk about something with a little different perspective. And what I like to talk about is a little bit about our documents, our archives, and how the students of today and our educators can integrate these examples into the classroom as a primary source, and why, you know, looking at primary source is so important in the classroom. So a little bit about the Chinese American Citizens Alliance, just to give context. So we were actually formed in 1895 as the native sons of the Golden State. And it started as a group of young Chinese American men who wanted to join a similar organization, but were denied entrance because of their ethnicity. So they took matters into their own hands, formed this particular organization, and which was incorporated in 1912 as the Chinese American Citizens Alliance. So as you can see, we have over 100 years of history. Currently, we are headquarters in San Francisco with 20 national chapters. And the mission back in 1895 and 1912 hasn't really changed. It's been a little bit refined to reflect the current, but really our goal is to advocate for the rights of the Chinese Americans, provide social enrichment for the community, and to build community. So that is our organization. So we have over 100 years of archives. And as you can see, this is in a building. It's actually in our basement. And it actually looks like a safe deposit bank vault. And we just have boxes and boxes and boxes of archives. And what we recognized at some point was we have a lot of history here. It's really valuable information for someone trying to do some research about the history of the Chinese American, but no one knew that this was available and no one had access to it because it was just sitting in a box, you know, in the building. And we also had concerns that because the building is about 100 years old, if we were to have a fire or a flood, potentially all these documents would be lost. And so if we lost it, we would lose a large part of the Chinese American history in the United States. So what the archives have, for example, are things like meeting minutes, applications, newsletters, photos, position papers, letters, and affidavits. So where are the archives today? Whoops, sorry. So the archives today are at Stanford. They're at the Stanford University Department of Special Collections of the library, and they have our records from 1912 to 2005. And what they have is they very meticulously went through everything, 184 linear feet or 378 boxes of records. So that's a lot of information. There's a very small collection at Cal, at the Ethnic Studies Library. There's probably about 2 or 3 boxes. And those records span from 1923 to 1973. So let's take a look a little bit at the archives. So this is a photo, and this is a committee, and this is some of our leaders back in 1911. And this is an article in the Sacramento Bee. And in this photo, you can see here, the Chinese native sons opposed this particular amendment, which actually may prohibited the son of a man not eligible to vote also be denied the privilege. So when you think about this, what do we think about how can we use this in the classroom, right? How do we analyze and evaluate, sensitive historical events? What was the impact of the exclusion laws and other discriminatory laws? And what did we do about these laws at that time, the Chinese Americans? How do we advocate? So I'm sure it was probably not an easy thing to say, hey, we're going to go up to Sacramento and we're going to, testify against this particular discriminatory law. And, by looking at primary sources, you can say, who advocated against these laws and who didn't, and why was that, right? So these are all questions that the students today can really consider and think about. This is a picture of a building where the Chinese Times, a Chinese language newspaper, was actually printed. And the Chinese Times was actually started by the Chinese American Citizens Alliance and was the only Chinese language paper without ties with a foreign country or a particular political group. So it was intended to be nonpartisan and not have any ties to China or to Taiwan or to any foreign government. So in this newspaper, you see events, opinions, endorsements, and it helps to really provide a historical narrative from the perspective of the people who lived during that time. And when you think about this, looking at it today, how did this particular newspaper differ than other Chinese language newspapers, from the time? What was the bias or, and why was that, right? So you have to think about, who were the reporters who owned the newspaper and what was their focus. Okay. This is a document that was actually sent to CACA. And this is actually from Hawaii, and this is regarding discrimination faced by the Chinese at the immigration office in Hawaii. And in the records, there were a lot of documents such as this, letters, affidavits, and statements. And there was a lot of requests for help for immigration affidavits. So if you kind of think about what were the Chinese experiencing, back in the early 1920s, this is still the time of the exclusion laws. So it is entirely possible that someone of Chinese ancestry traveled back to China. They could have lost their paper, or even here in the United States, they were forced to have, documents. And if they lost something, they would get help from an organization such as CACA, who could provide an affidavit or a statement to help them. So really looking at immigration, you think about what was going on at that time, with our, whether you're a citizen or a non-citizen, because they were not afforded the same rights as, every other citizen. So this is an example of a application from 1916 for membership to the Los Angeles chapter, and it includes information such as place of birth, current residence and name of the parents, wife, number of children, and occupation. Other documents include World War II, era identification certificates. And what this actually did was to help provide legal support for immigration. Also, and this actually changed, this is all before the exclusion laws, right? So what this does, if you look through a period of these identification documents, you can look at trends. Where did they come from, right? It's not just, nowadays people just think, oh, they came from China, but where in China, right? And it kind of tells you what was the patterns of immigration, where did people live, were they married, that they had a wife that was able to come over. We also have documents about political involvement. So this is a there's communication with government representatives regarding bills that impacted the Chinese American community. And this particular document is a notice to the community with, just like today, with candidates that they have endorsed that they think would be favorable in terms of advancing legislation that would be favorable to the Chinese American community. So when you look at this, what you think about, if you're a citizen or Chinese American versus a recent immigrant, how would that be different? What is the difference, between the different populations? And my last example is, so one of the things that CACA provided was death benefits, because in the early 1900s, there was, Chinese Americans and Chinese here in the US could not buy life insurance. So if something happened, the family, especially if the man was the major breadwinner, the family would be destitute. So we provided death benefits depending on how long they were a member and so on. And these records include their name, how long they were a member, when they register for this benefit, their beneficiary. So anyone doing research on the family, this is actually a very good way to kind of find out, who were the families, and this all can be tracked by where they were a member. So they knew where they were a member, about what decade they were a member, and all this information is available. So I kind of brought these examples because I wanted to kind of explain that by looking at some of these primary sources, we really can look at history from the voices of those who were affected, right? Because if you look at history from the voices today, it's a different perspective, right? And so this helps to promote a deeper understanding that history is a series of events, and helps to connect the past with the present, and to understand what happened in the context of time or environment. And probably very important for the students of today is to build research and critical thinking skills. So thank you. I'm going to hand this back over to Anne.
Thank
Melanie, you need to not sharing the screen now.
Okay.
Thank you so much. I think that it's really a great lead into what I'm going to be speaking about. So when we talk about the role of CACA as a primary source originator, or activism in the primary role, and then Stanford being the role of the content creator and development of sort of the academic presentation of this history. As a person that grew up in Boston, I had zero knowledge of any of this that happened in the US. I actually never knew about internment and any of these acts until I was an adult and I relocated to Southern California, unfortunately. And this was growing up in inner city Boston and some of the suburbs of Boston, unfortunately. So this content is so important. And I think that leads me to give you some background on our organization, and we really appreciate the opportunity to share it with you. So let me share my screen. So TeachAAPI is an organization that was founded last year through an unfortunate incident that my child experienced in school over Zoom class, very much linked to COVID and the sentiment against Asian Americans. And instead of comforting him only and telling the other child that it was okay and maybe it was a mishap that happened once in a while, I decided to think about what constructively we could do in my community, my parent community, to prevent this from happening to future generations. And it was a microaggressive joke about Chinese people, but it really hit home to me because just growing up in Boston, I heard those all the time. And it was 40, 38 years later, and it's still happening. So together with 10 other board members, we formed a 501c3. So our mission is to get Asian American history into the hands of children. When you think about all the great curricula that's out there, all the great content that's out there, a lot of it is dependent on educators, teachers, principals deciding that they want to integrate it into their social studies class, their English class. And what we do that's quite unique is that we activate advocates within schools. And all the time, 100% of the time, that's passionate parents that want to see this stuff taught to their children, want to see it discussed in classrooms. And what we do is, our mission is to create pride and identity so that our children are seeing themselves represented and discussed in the classroom. But more importantly, that kids that are not like our children see that our history is discussed and our contributions are discussed as well. Because if AAPI are just talking to AAPI, change doesn't happen and perception doesn't change. And so we have many pillars, but we focus on pride and identity, inclusion, and building allyship, and then building this community, and then partnering with key organizations that have vetted curriculum, because we are not curriculum creators. We are facilitators of delivery and community building. And we look at also figuring out how to connect that to present day AAPI stories. So as I mentioned, we launched in May of last year. We have a board of 10 professionals, and we have a deep nonprofit experience. But what was connecting all of us on the board, and possibly all of our funders and our supporters, is that there isn't one person in our organization or that has gone to our events that hasn't experienced an event themselves, a racist event or a conversation, or that their child hasn't experienced it. And so our whole goal is to stop that from continuing to happen and make this the last generation that experiences these types of events. And so we've launched a website, we have social media presence, and also we've partnered with some key content providers, but also bookstores, because they are also influencers of book lists to schools, and also what librarians kind of present to their students. And we have a library that's constantly changing and dynamic on our website that educators and parents can come and look for school titles, interactive multimedia presentations, and things like that. And as Esther mentioned, we've signed on 11 significant schools in LA, and we're working with one significant public school system. And so that totals about 10,000 kids, I would say. And we're looking to collaborate with schools in the cities where, and in the states where legislation has been passed that requires AAPI curriculum. So something that is quite interesting about us is that we have an ecosystem of how we intend to interact with a school and a community. And we start with interactive digital curriculum, which I'll talk about later, but we want to build allyship through community events. So we've had 2 major community events to date, and you can't see the diversity in the crowd because the pictures are very small, but let's say 30% of the attendees out of 200 plus are non-AAPI, and they come and they want to learn about AAPI culture. And our goal is to bring together the diaspora of AAPI. So our first event was focused on Pacific Islanders. So we had a deep Pacific Islander presentation, and then obviously a dance performance. And then this past weekend, we focused on Thai culture, and we will move on and focus on South Asian culture, like Indian culture with the Holi Festival next year. So our objective is to go deep. We have presentations at these events, but it's also about just learning from each other, experiencing the culture and the beauty, and seeing the beauty of the culture. And then we have collaborated with artists locally, and you can see that with these posters that we've created here to talk about significant participants in AAPI history, whether they are athletes or celebrities or politicians. Our whole goal too is to help people see that AAPI are not of one type of background or type of career that they choose, but they come from all backgrounds, and they contribute in many, many ways. And then this one I love to share because this is an example of what we do. And our mantra is that there isn't anything geographically, legislatively, that prevents our curriculum from reaching a child. And that's very powerful. Oftentimes what we see is that there is a lot of self-service sources out there on the internet, but how does it actually get to the child? And what we do that's quite different is that we hold events that are distributed to librarians or to school administrators, but they are not waiting for legislation to pass. All we need is somebody at a school to be interested in our program. They sign up and they can participate in it live or as recorded. But this one recent event that we did in May, we had a 1-hour talk with a Disney animator. And if you guys have young kids, like over COVID, the author Mo Willems had his lunch hour because he was trying to give the teachers, parents a break at home, and he would sketch his key characters on YouTube, and he would talk about the story, his stories, and he would talk about why he created that character. And we did something similar, but we decided to find an AAPI animator, and his name was Benson Shum, and he works at Disney during the day, but he has a number of picture books. And so during that hour, he talked about this dinosaur whose superpower was flower petals instead of his typical fire-breathing kind of family, and how he was special for having this unique talent. And during that 1 hour, we reached 24 schools, 64 classrooms, and over 1,500 children. And we want to do more of this. And so our curriculum is, our approach is 3 dimensions. We have the virtual, we have in-person, cultural kind of engagement, and then we have community building. And we intend to continue to do that as the year progresses, and we're planning our next school year right now. One thing that I do want to say is we worked with my son's school in particular, and over the course of 1 year, we've had significant and drastic change in terms of integration of real AAPI history into our school. So I'll give you another example of what we do. So we go in and we activate parents, and we talk to administrators, and we work with them on a 3-year plan of implementation and integration. And this year, my first grader wrote a paper on Fred Korematsu and Mamie tape. And that was never in the curriculum before. And for a first grader to hear about that is so incredible to me, but it's also incredible that all of his non-API class members learned about those 2 significant members. And then I'll give you a second example. My 4th grader, his teacher decided to create a interactive, empathetic sort of situation in class, and it was titled China Boy, and it was based on a story during the Chinese railroad days, but it was talking about a Chinese boy and a white girl in a store, and the shopkeeper didn't want to serve the boy, and what would you do if you were either one of them? And so these are the types of changes that we make, that we spark in schools, and it's been quite incredible to see that in our school community. So I thank you for allowing me to tell you more about TeachAAPI, and now we are going to open it for Q&A to our panelists. If you have a question, please submit it via chat.
I can ask a question.
Okay, please go ahead. I have a question for you after.
I was curious if TeachAAPI, obviously you're currently working primarily in Southern California. Do you consider yourself a regional organization, or are you interested in reaching out more broadly?
100%. We're interested in reaching out more broadly. We have a model and a playbook that we believe is very scalable. So we have this model where we have regional ambassadors that kind of focus on areas that they live in, and they can work with the local parents and advocates, and we can share all of our materials with them. So we want to be national. We want to be in Illinois. We want to be in New Jersey. We want to be in New York. We want to be in Northern California. We just spent the last school year perfecting our model so that we know that we can take it and move it to 20, 50 schools, but that's really our objective.
Great.
Thank you for asking. Okay, we have a question coming in. How do schools participate in SPICE programs? Is there a cost involved?
Yes, I'll go ahead and take that. For our teacher programs, there is no cost. In fact, we offer stipends for our summer institutes, modest stipends to each teacher who participates. For our courses like the China Scholars Program, the Reischauer Scholars Program, which focuses on Japan, and the Sejong Korea Scholars Program, there is a tuition charge. That is our way to sustain the courses. And it varies a bit depending upon how much outside support or internal support we receive from Stanford. So there's a modest tuition.
Thank you, Gary. And the next question is, how can we provide Asian language materials so that students' elders can also have resources? Lily, do you want to clarify that? Do you mean that you would like some of the materials online to be translated? And we can move on to the next question while we wait for Lily to clarify. Ivan Young, how do we introduce TeachAAPI program to our school district? Should we start with the school board? Actually, just reach out to us. Go to our website and there's a reach out. It's teachaapi@gmail.com. You can email us, and we actually have an approach of what you do and how you do it, and who do you ask and what questions do you ask them so that you have the highest chance of success. So we love to help you, Felicia. And Lily just clarified, yes, translations cost a lot. So how can we all help fundraise? So they'd like to have some of the programming translated. Gary or Tanya?
Yeah, I'll take that one. In terms of the curriculum that we write, everything's in English, but in fact, there are some curriculum units that we actually have been hoping to translate, like the graphic novel as an example, but it is expensive, and so that's been difficult for us to raise funding for that. In terms of the other part of the question, I think she referred to curriculum, but in terms of, school districts like where I live in San Jose, there's a significant number of Vietnamese Americans, and some of the school districts actually offer at the district level translations into Vietnamese for the elders or for the more recent immigrants. So I'm really glad that's happening. I imagine you can see that still in communities where there are large numbers of Chinese and Chinese Americans, Korean Americans. But I wish that were more widespread. But in terms of our curriculum, I agree. I would like to do a lot more with that. But really, our mandate at SPICE has primarily been with the social studies area, not so much with language teaching, right? So we don't have really materials for use in Chinese language classrooms, though teachers do utilize the primary sources, the graphic novels, in their teaching, right? But we don't craft the methodology or translate ourselves, though we would like to in some cases.
Thank you, Gary. Two more questions.
I could just put in as a parent, I live in South Seattle, and we are, minority white, probably majority immigrant neighborhood, Vietnamese, Chinese, Spanish speaking, Somali, Ethiopian. Those are our main language groups in our school. And so we just automatically, everything for the PTA has to be translated.
Mm-hmm.
So we always have a budget set aside to pay community translators. It's just necessary. So I think that that's kind of part of from the ground up in your school or your PTA or whatever, you take that step first. This budget has to exist.
Yes, agreed. And Lily just said, it may take some community level volunteer work altogether to make the social studies information in languages other than English. Totally agree. Okay, Wilson Lee has a question. Does SPICE offer training for elementary and secondary teachers? Do teachers get teacher credits?
Thank you for that question. Currently, we offer 2 summer institutes, and depending on funding, we either offer both in the summer or 1 per summer, and we rotate between middle school teachers and high school teachers. And in the case of our seminars that we offer through the National Consortium for Teaching About Asia, thanks to the Freeman Foundation, we are able to offer stipends, I mentioned that earlier, to the teachers. And in the case of SPICE's work with teachers, they become eligible for Stanford University continuing studies credits, which teachers have to pay for. We cannot cover that fee, but it's modest.
Don't they also get professional development units of some kind for their school?
Correct. Right. That's right. Mm-hmm. They have to pay a fee, modest fee. In terms of elementary schools, we on occasion have seminars for elementary school teachers, and we wish we could do more. And whenever we have a seminar focused for elementary schools, we used to fill the rooms. And so this is something we would like to do more in. Again, importantly, one important aspect of SPICE is for us to reflect in our curriculum, in our teacher professional development, Stanford scholarship. So the topics tend to be more secondary, in focus. But we would definitely like to do more at the elementary school level.
Great. There are no more questions, and we are at the end of our time. Oh, wait, one more question. Hold on a sec. No, we are done. Esther, I'll turn it over to you to wrap it up.
Okay. Thank you so much for all the presentation. You guys are wonderful. And thank you for all the great work you do and your organization is doing. This is the first time I heard about TeachAAPI. Great work. And you have such good relationship with the schools. I mean, that's really helpful, I think. And please keep up the good work. And as like Wilson was typing in the Q&A, if you can work even with SPICE, we think it would be a great idea. Just promote, all our Chinese American or Asian American history to the next generation. And not just like exactly what Ann said, not just to only AAPI, to everyone in this country. That we are not just a taker, we are a giver too. And thank you, Gary and Tanya. Really appreciate your presentation. I think you guys just do a little because you only have that little time. I know you guys did way more than what you presented to us. Thank you for all the great work you've done on the Chinese American. Really appreciate. We hope we can maybe, another half a year or so get together again and do another webinar and, share a little bit more. That would be wonderful. I think it's very helpful. And I mean, I learned a lot and I hope I can learn more from you. And I'm so glad Melanie is with us. So glad that CACA has have all archived the thing to Stanford SPICE, and which I think that's very helpful too, because we need those information so that the teacher can use and teach the next generation. So good job, CACA National President. Okay, so thank you so much for joining us. And again, thank you again for the panelists and our wonderful moderator, and you did a wonderful job. So have a good night. And we still have a few more important webinars. So please go to our website, cahf.us, and looking forward to see you guys again. Okay, have a very good night. Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.